introduction. Didn't expect that. But I know that there could be some here who have no idea what I'm doing up here. Sometimes I don't have any idea what I'm doing up here. But anyway, I think I heard, I wasn't the first choice, okay? Somebody else didn't make it, so here I am. Ready or not. But anyway, today's Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all you fathers and grandfathers and uncles and all you people who've had to act as fathers, because I know that happens. This is a day set aside to honor you, as Ray said before. And I don't think it's something we should do on just one day of the year, of course. We're told to honor our parents every day of the year. But today's your special day. And so I'm going to talk about fathers today. Jesus came into the world calling God his Father. And that's our really special Father that we want to talk about. He even went further to say he was a spitting image of his Father. He was, when we saw him and when we heard him, then we could see exactly who the Father was. And God revealed himself as Father, though, even before the birth of Jesus, because back in the Old Testament, you'll read that God called himself Father to Israel. He does that over and over in the Old Testament. And also at one time, he called Solomon his son. He told King David, Solomon will now be my son. So he's revealed himself as Father, but not as individually as Jesus, of course, did, and which he did over and over in the New Testament, calling God his Father. So even though God is neither male nor female, he has no gender in that regard, we are taught to call him Father, our Father who art in heaven, and that's what Jesus told us to do. Now, God chose Joseph. I'm going to talk a little bit about Jesus' father. He chose Joseph as Jesus' foster father or stepfather, what do you want to call him. And Joseph was described in the Bible as an honorable man. He was a carpenter, and I'm sure he taught Jesus all those skills that he knew. And you know that he taught him the scriptures, because that's what good Jewish fathers did. They always made sure their sons knew the scriptures. He must have been a good father and also a good husband to Mary, because he was an honorable man, and Jesus must have loved him very much. Of course, Jesus had a perfect relationship with his Father in heaven. He prayed to him often, sometimes all night. He was in constant contact with him. He loved his Father. He was in his Father in him. And even when he was being tortured to death, he did not lose faith in his Father. He knew he was there for him, right unto death. Somehow, in a way, I can't describe or even imagine, Jesus knew God was his Father from childhood. I don't know when that happened. I don't know how that happened. But by age 12, as it says in the Bible, he already knew that God was his Father. In the temple, if you remember the story in Luke 2:49, that Jesus told his parents when he was left there because he was off somewhere, and his parents went back home and couldn't find him on the way, he said, well, why didn't you look at the temple? That's my Father's house. That's my Father. I'm about his business, and that's where I should be. Of course, at Jesus' baptism, God publicly affirmed Jesus as his son, and that's in Matthew 3:16-17. And when Jesus was baptized, he went up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And lo, a voice from heaven saying, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. So Jesus knew that he was on this earth for a purpose, to accomplish something he and his Father had planned from the beginning. Now, I appreciate fathers very much. My dad died young, even before he was age 50, so I haven't had a father to give gifts and cards to for quite a while. Fathers should be appreciated, so when you've got your father still alive, we'll be very, very glad. Appreciate them. Now, fathers matter. Whether you fathers think you're teachers or not, you are. You're great teachers. Fathers can teach all kinds of things to their children. Now, I saw a whole list of things that fathers can teach. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but I'm going to choose some of them just to talk about. Fathers can teach their children to have faith and courage to go forward in faith. Fathers can teach self-confidence. Now, I'm talking about to girls and to boys. And one of the ways that fathers do this is by teaching them skills. Fathers can teach their kids how to, do basketball, how to dribble a ball, how to swim or ride a bike or any of those things. And you think, well, maybe I don't ride a bike much anymore. Sometimes as an adult, you may not do some of those skills that your father taught you, dribbling a basketball or whatever. But when you're successful at doing those things as a child, you grow up with a sense of self-confidence, that you have the courage then to go forth and try new things because you have that as an experience in your life. Fathers can also teach children how to win and how to lose. They can teach them how to be good sports and how to be a team player. All those things are qualities that fathers can teach. Fathers can teach them about Jesus. They can teach them how Jesus didn't discriminate against people in his culture and time. Children need to be taught not to be bigots or racists. They need to be taught not to be bullies. It's amazing how many times you read about in the paper and hear about in the news kids are bullying other kids. Fathers can teach against that. But the most important aspect of fatherhood, of course, is teaching their kids about God and having a relationship with God. And when fathers go to church, and I've read statistics on this, their adult children are much more likely to go to church too. Now, I'm not saying anything against moms, but it seems that if fathers go, it's even more likely that their adult children will go. Fathers matter. They really do. Now, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but how many of you watch NCIS? I have to raise my hand high. If I'm even near a television on Tuesday night at 7 p.m., I'm watching NCIS. It's actually, and I read this in the paper last week, probably the most watched show on television ever. It's that popular. And I try to analyze, why is that show so popular? It does have good writers, it has lots of action, it's fun to watch. I got to think, well, maybe it's because it's a family. The whole team is a family, and maybe it's kind of like Bonanza was for some of those of you who remember Bonanza.
There's a top guy named Gibbs on that.
Yes. I was going to call him the father figure, but that's okay. Top Gun is fine. Leroy Jethro Gibbs. I'm glad to know you watch it occasionally, if not more often. That's the father figure, the main character in the movie is Leroy Jethro Gibbs. He's a former Marine, and he leads this team of special agents who go after these, any suspicious deaths that happen in any of the service organizations. He's rough around the edges and he's tough as nails. Now, Gibbs is of an older generation. He's not computer literate. He hates smartphones. Or any kind of, I see a hand raised. He doesn't like any of what he calls doodads, electronic doodads. His team can use those. He doesn't like them. Now, I'm sure some in his generation relate to that. But why do young people tune in and watch NCIS? Now, sure, the agents on there are attractive and, shall we say, sexy. So that is always appealing. But so are a lot of other shows on TV that aren't watched nearly as much. Practically all of them have attractive people, on them. And Gibbs is rough on this team. If they have to go hungry, if they have to stay up and work all night, that's what they're going to do. If they have a dirty job to do, they do it. He has a lot of rules that he expects them to follow. He expects them to memorize them. He expects them to do them. And if they don't do them, well, he reminds them of that sometimes with a slap upside the head, back of the head. Father figure, well, I'm glad he wasn't my father, or my boss either, but he wouldn't be the kind I would appreciate. But his team, they kind of look up to him as this Superman kind of guy, and they put up with whatever he hands out, including the slaps to the head. In real life, I think that'd be kind of miserable way to be. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but what I'm thinking is that maybe why young people and all of us watch that show is because it's a yearning for stability, maybe discipline in our lives, a family closeness, because that team is his family. And I think that's sometimes often missing in the world. And even though Gibbs might not be the perfect example of a father or a boss, he does teach his people courage and good work ethics, teamwork, all those qualities that are good, support one another. As I said, he considers this team his family, and they understand that. They feel like they are a family. I feel the TV series is touching a need again, as we all have, and that's this family closeness. And we need good fathers and mothers. Now, maybe you guys out there don't consider yourself the perfect example of a father, but that's okay, because you really can't be perfect. We're human, all of us. And even though we know in our hearts we can't be perfect, that love that we have for our children will show through. It will. It's also good to tell them, though, too, once in a while that you love them. Now, I hate to even bring up bad fathers, but I'm going to. Unfortunately, they are teachers, too. If you had an abusive father, or a father who abandoned you, or or maybe even fathers are still around but have no concern or support their children at all. So they don't seem to bother or show any interest in what their children are doing. That's still an abandonment. I had a friend who had an abusive father. Unhappily, I have several friends and acquaintances who've had abusive fathers. But my friend's father was more abusive to his wife than he was to his children, unless the children interfered, of course, and then it was tough. My friend had to grow up in that environment. She hated her father. She wished he were dead. When she was older, she learned that her father had been kicked out of the home by his mother when he was 12. He had to go out and on his own, find a relative who would be willing to take him in. So you might understand how he viewed women the way he did when his own mother didn't love it. You saw the Shaq movie. You saw how Mac responded when he learned how his father had been treated as a child. It helped him to forgive his father, to understand where his father was coming from. And she had that same experience. When she grew up and she learned about the circumstances of her father's life, then she was able to forgive him. Now, I had a good father, a kind and loving father. He was a strong man, but a gentle man, and he taught me all kinds of things. He was one of 6 boys and 1 girl, and he really didn't think his daughters could get in much trouble anyway, Now, my mother thought differently, thankfully, but she knew girls could get into trouble too, and I think he learned that later on. But again, I want to talk about fathers. Bad fathers are good fathers because fathers matter. I want to stress how important fathers are, not just only to the physical well-being of their families, but to the spiritual well-being. Having a good father or a bad father can affect how you view and how your children view your heavenly Father and that relationship with him. If you have a strict disciplinarian like Gibbs, then you're going to likely see God that way. You're going to see that, you're going to think of him as good and strong and mighty, a God you can admire, but you better not break any of those rules or you're going to be in trouble and have to face the consequences. Now, if you had a father who abandoned you and your family, then you may question whether God really cares about you at all. You know, a lot of people are like that, think there's no God. And why pray to a God like that who doesn't show any interest or care for you anyway? Of course, having an abusive father can lead you to fear God, can lead you to be terrified of what he might do if you made a mistake, can force you to be away from God, not even care about God. Now, of course, I think my dad was the best of all. He was gentle and he was fun, and he made me bows and arrows and taught me how to ride a bike and a horse. Of course, that way was just put me on the horse and let me ride, but he taught me how to shoot a gun and how to throw a knife, and he took me fishing. My sister and I got to do a lot of fun things because we lived in the country. He and my mom taught me about God from my earliest childhood. But my dad wasn't perfect, and I'm not going to go in. This is Father's Day. I'm not going to tell you about what his imperfections were. But one example was that he didn't discipline me, never disciplined me. And so that gave me a feeling that pretty much any decision I made would be okay with God. That's not good, because that's not true. That's not true. God is not going to be pretty much okay with any decision we make. Some things he won't be okay with. So whatever type of father you've had, there's no perfect fathers, except one, that's God our Father. And that goes for you who are fathers too. But I do say be there for your kids. Always be there for them. And if you had a bad father, then learn from that experience and break that cycle. And I have a quote here from a notable person, Joe DeKoch, which I thought really went along with this. I know that some of you reading this have not had a good relationship with your human father. I also know that the painful feelings of those bad relationships sometimes get projected onto God our Father. If that's the case for you, I've got good news. Those bad perceptions can be overcome by extending forgiveness to the human father who failed to be the kind of dad God designed him to be. Rather than remaining trapped in the past, please remember that God is in the business of healing and changing individual people and even whole families. So if you've had a bad father, you can learn from that, and you can overcome that with God's help. So now I'd like to hear from you. You've heard a little bit about my father, and I'm sure while you've been sitting there listening to me about fathers, you've had thoughts about personal experiences with your own father. So I'd like to hear about that. So we've got Ray back there with a microphone, and I'll just ask you this question. What was the best thing your father ever taught you, or that you ever learned from him? And this is open to everyone, so let's hear from you guys. Linda? Here he comes.
Well, my dad, he was born to his mother she was 40 and had a lot of health problems, and his brother was like 10 years older. And so he was kind of, and his dad died at 10, and spent a lot of time with older people because he lived with his aunt and uncle a lot because his mother remarried and his stepfather wouldn't let him stay home. And so he started working really young. Mm. And but he always wanted a family. And he always spent time with us when he had time. Now, my mother did most of the discipline because whenever you're away working, you misjudge the situation. And I will say, every time he did punish us, he always picked the wrong kid. But he didn't do it very often because he knew that he wasn't in a position to know what was going on. But he was kind of he read the Bible. He'd been raised by old people. They had taught religion all his life. So from a very young age, we were taught about God, whether we went to church or not. And he he shared life experiences that he did not want us to ever have to deal with. So I led a
That's
very
important.
sheltered life because he hadn't. That's it. Really thought about him a lot today because my mother has been remembering a lot of stories
Oh,
that she has never told before.
that's great.
Sorry.
Anybody else? Best thing you've learned from your father, or your father taught you?
Well, my father was a carpenter, just like Jesus. And he felt that us girls needed to learn a little bit about carpentering because he didn't know who we were going to marry or what we were going to do. And he says, I'm going to make sure that my son learns a little bit about cooking and cleaning house so he'll know in case he gets a wife that couldn't. Well, my brother has gone through several wives that couldn't. I think he's finally found one that can. And us girls found husbands that we've been together long periods of time and been more able to help each other along the way.
Sounds like a good father to me.
Well, I grew up in the city, but I also learned a lot of the things you talked about, except the riding the horse part.
Oh, okay.
But my father was ill as a child, and it affected a lot of what happened in the rest of his life. But he was very determined and strong and a hard worker and very religious. He read his Bible every single night before he went to bed. And I watched all that. He didn't come to me and say, you must do this.
Yeah.
But it impacted my life. He taught me a lot of skills that a father would teach a son. So I know how to fix things. And I actually, that was probably to my detriment because I preferred to do that than to learn how to cook from my mother. So. And he doesn't cook either. So. But anyway, I am wearing a ring that my father had as a young man and wore on his wedding day, and I'm wearing it in honor of him today.
Oh,
He
well,
was a good father.
that's beautiful. That's a beautiful story.
My dad was one of 21 kids.
Wow.
And so in their family dynamic, the word I love you wasn't used that often because his dad was busy working, and that's his example in his life. So how can I improve this? Should I turn around? So my dad didn't say I love you very often, but I could tell he could because he gave of his time. So what I mean is my dad would let me stand on his feet and we would dance together. I love baseball, so he would let me pitch to him, and my pitching was so accurate that I was on some of the women's team, even city teams. He would let me break down his engine with him, tinker under the hood, as you say. So, we spent a lot of time together doing the things that maybe guys would do more of, but I enjoyed that he was willing to explain how things work. And then also he would ride bicycles with us and spend time, just the little things. So he didn't say I love you that often, but he was fun to be with.
You knew he loved you.
We knew he loved us, yes.
That's right. Anybody else? Well, let me see if another question might. One more. Oh yeah, our time's up, isn't it? Some of you grandfathers. Now that you're grandfathers, how do you treat your grandchildren? Do you treat them the same way you did your children, or is it different?
It's different. You get in a swimming pool with a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old soon to be, you're going to get whooped.
Anybody else? Somebody's pointing at somebody here.
Well, my father was a very simple man, a hard worker, and one of the things he taught me was loyalty, to go to church, which was very important. He taught me the basic skills. But as a grandfather, things are a little bit different. You love the grandchildren. When you're older, you slow down a little bit, and it's harder to keep up with the grandchildren. And one of the things I find that it is easy to love on them, even depending on how they act. You know, as teenagers, they act a little different than they were when they were 5, 6, 7 years old. So you have to tolerate that sort of thing. But it's wonderful to love on them. And in a way, when your own children are growing up, they're with you all the time. But with grandchildren, especially if they're out of town and a distance from you, you appreciate the time you have. But then when you have enough, it's nice to let them go with their parents.
True. That is absolutely true. I know my son-in-law, Alan, his son asked him, what happened to my dad? Because Alan just lets those kids do whatever. I mean, and they just drag him around and he does whatever. But, I mean, that may change when they get to be teenagers, but right now he's very lenient.
Yes, I was going to talk a little bit about my experience with grandchildren. Yes, it is different. You have much less time with them, but you still have a lot of the same things that you teach them when you're with them, but you also need to respect, or I do, try to respect the parents. Because now you're dealing with a parent and someone who you didn't grow up with as the other parent that's guiding the children. So you also are able to help them in dealing with their children. So it's kind of interesting to see them grow as adults with their own children coming to you and saying, how do I handle this?
Yeah.
What do I do? Kind of thing. So it is different. It is different. And I cherish every moment I get with my grandkids. Like I said, you don't have the same amount of time as you do with your own kids.
That's right. Thanks. Well, I'd like to hear a lot more stories, but I guess I better quit. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, almighty and loving God, thank you for your love for us. Thank you for the fathers here and for the mothers who've had to act as both parents to the children. They're here too. Bless them and guide them as they accomplish one of the most important tasks that there is, rearing children in a godly household. And it's not just physical fathers and mothers who influence our children and grandchildren. Bless all your people here who act as godly examples and Christian guides to our young people. They're also the fathers and mothers in our congregation. As we've said before, please remember our pastors and the mission trips as they serve in Mexico. We want to think about those teams and what's going on there with them every day. Put your protecting angels around them. We love you, Lord, and we thank you for being our loving Father, the perfect example of what a father should be. And we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.